Hi class, this is week 8, video 5, and I'm going to talk about freedom of movement, and specifically we're going to talk about passports in this video. In an earlier video, I mentioned that in the European Union you can work anywhere. The EU provides freedom of movement for workers, which is defined as, quote, the right of member state nationals to seek and accept employment throughout the EU. So that's 27 nations that you can choose from. If you live in the European Union, you can work in any of those 27 nations, but naturally there are some limits. Number one, travel can be denied on the grounds of public policy. It can be denied on the grounds of public security, and it can be denied on the grounds of public health. I think that third one's easy to understand, right? For example, you can imagine how an outbreak of SARS or the swine flu or maybe some strange coronavirus could lead them to close all the borders, right? But there's a fourth limit in the European Union on the freedom of movement, and that's it's this quote. It says, the provisions of this article shall not apply to employment in the public service. In other words, government jobs may require you to not move around. You got to stay in your country if you're going to work for the government. And, you know, that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to work for the tax service of France, you need to be in France at the office or whatever. But what if you don't live in the European Union? How much freedom of movement do you have if you're outside of the EU? Well, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in 1948, says everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. But that is not the rule everywhere. That's just the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I've said is really, it's a declaration, but it's not law, not really law. Anyway, so that doesn't mean everybody. Not everybody in every part of the world gets to move wherever they want. Did you ever see the movie Moscow on the Hudson? A long time ago, if you're not my age, you might not have any idea there was such a movie. But it's a Robin Williams movie, and like all his movies, it's funny. It's a good one. In fact, when I was looking it up to talk about it in the video here, a number of reviewers put it in among the list of some of his best movies. But anyway, it's not as well known as the bigger ones like Hook or Aladdin or whatever. But so anyway, the teaser for the movie, this was 1984, so a long time ago, very early in Robin Williams' career. The teaser, one of the teasers on the movie box, if you bought the movie, it says, a Russian saxophonist visits New York with a circus troupe and suddenly decides to defect from the USSR during a shopping trip to a department store, which is Bloomingdale's, by the way. If you've ever been in New York City, it was a famous shopping place. Anyway, while he's in Bloomingdale's, he decides he's going to leave Russia and get away from all of the circus and hide out in America until they're gone. But the saxophonist, played by Robin Williams, finds adjusting to American life more difficult than he imagined. And then I got a picture here of it's kind of the movie poster. It's funny how all those things have changed now, that movies don't come in boxes, and how half of us never even go to the theater. But anyway, Robin Williams, Moscow on the Hudson, the idea being Moscow is the capital of Russia. So a lot of Russians came to New York City to do the circus. But this isn't completely far-fetched, by the way. Throughout the Cold War, when Soviets would travel, whether to New York or wherever, there was always a risk that people would sneak away and defect. For example, when Mikhail Baryshnikov, I started to say Gorbachev, but when Mikhail Baryshnikov, a famous lead dancer in the Russian ballet, when they were coming to America, a lot of people were talking about, well, maybe Baryshnikov will defect, run off and hide somewhere, and the KGB can't find him, and then they have to go back to Russia without him. I don't believe that happened, but anyway, it's a common thing. If you live, in a communist nation, you're not allowed to leave because they know you won't come back. Can you imagine living in a place where they won't let you out of the country because they know you'll never return? Okay, see where I'm putting my pages. Okay, anyway, the twist on the Moscow movie with Robin Williams, the twist in it is it was a circus clown who wanted to defect. And he talked and he talked and he talked and he talked about it to everybody. So much so that the KGB, which is a secret police, but they weren't really secret, the KGB knew that the clown wanted to run away and escape to New York. And so they had their eyes on him. But they weren't really expecting anything from the saxophonist who had a good life back in Moscow, and he never thought he would want to leave. And, once you defect, you're not going back. If you do, they'll throw you in prison. So you're never going to see your family and friends again. But at some point in Bloomingdale's, the character played by Robin Williams decides, maybe I'll make a go of this thing and I'm going to be an American. But the clown, it turns out, he chickened out. And then the sax player decided that he wanted to leave Russia forever and become an American. But anyway, reading my notes, I mentioned some of this. The reason I bring up the movie, the point is the Soviet government would not let anybody out. Okay? When Russians traveled, whether it was with the Olympics or the ballet or whatever, the KGB would travel with them to watch them at all times. Many dictatorships besides Russia, it's not just Russia, particularly the communist nations, many of them do the same thing. They won't let anybody out, because who would ever come back to North Korea? Once you get out, you ain't going back. That same can be said of Cuba for a lot of reasons. I guess some people would probably go back and forth, but let me read you some more of what I've written here. Why do people run out of North Korea? I read about this in a book. A woman and her son, they ran out of North Korea on the frozen Yellow River. The river was frozen solid. They ran across the river into China. So China's another communist country. But they were so determined to get out of North Korea, they ran across the river into China to get away from their homeland. Also, the woman had been in and out of prison in North Korea, and she knew they were going to come for her. So she took her son, and they went into China, and then they got through China, and in a roundabout way got to South Korea, and then eventually to the U.S. It's a great story. Interesting book called The Eyes of the Tailless Animals, because the prison guards would tell them they were the same as animals, they just didn't have tails. Second question: why do Cubans build homemade rafts and launch themselves into the Gulf of Mexico, just hoping that they're going to find their way to Florida, 90 miles away? I mean, that's a heck of a risk. Why do they do that? Because they want to get out. Okay. Why did Yasiel Puig, I believe he plays on the Dodgers right now, why did Puig attempt to escape Cuba 13 times before he finally escaped into Mexico and then to the United States to join the Major League Baseball? And then he had to send a lot of money back down into Mexico and I think Cuba to pay off people who helped him get out. Agents and, people like that. But people will do whatever it takes to get out of a communist nation. Okay, I got a picture here of Yasiel Puig, and it's this great article that you should look up. It says, Escape from Cuba, Yasiel Puig's untold journey to the Dodgers. Then it says, the shocking saga of Major League Baseball's most controversial player. April 14th, 2014. So it was 7 years ago the article came out. But I don't know, since then, I mean, there's a movie about him that's pretty good, or kind of a documentary that's pretty interesting about his escape from Cuba. Anyway, it's a great story. But my point then is, so whatever the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, okay, Russia doesn't care, China doesn't care, North Korea, they don't care, and Cuba doesn't care. No Soviet nation is going to worry about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, some nations just will not give you any freedom. The total amount of freedom they're going to give you as far as international travel is zero, okay? Other nations, such as the European Union member nations, they promise you complete freedom, at least within the 27 EU nations. You don't have to have a passport, nothing, okay, in the European Union. But most nations they fall somewhere in between. You can travel internationally, but you will need papers. That's how we do it in the United States. Okay, and what do you call those papers? Passports. Okay, the passport. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about passports a little bit. Raise your hand if you have a passport. I might be able to find mine. It's been expired as long as most of you have been alive, possibly. Very long time ago since I used. I've been in Mexico when we didn't need a passport, and I've been back without one and kind of got fussed at there quite a bit. But I was already back in America, and then they weren't going to keep us in jail, but they did fuss at us. Anyway, I don't have a passport at the moment that's valid. My son has one and my daughter has one. I think hers might have expired. My wife's has expired. Anyway, it's been a while since we traveled. The passport, let me just read you my notes. The U.S. government has repeatedly held that American citizens do not have a right to a passport. Okay? Let me repeat that and you can write it down. American citizens do not have a right to a passport or a right to leave the country. Okay? I mean, it's not an automatic right. They can stop you. That's really the better way to put it. Consider the case of Hague versus Agee, a Supreme Court case that held up the right of the executive branch to revoke a citizen's passport for reasons of national security and the foreign policy interests of the United States. And I kind of wrote some of the story here. I summed it up in a real short way, not the way I normally go over cases with a little bit more detail. Agee, who is a former CIA agent, so an American spy, a secret agent, he had begun exposing agents by name and photograph in his personal campaign to supposedly fight the U.S. CIA wherever it is operating. So he goes to London and he tells everyone, hey, I am now going to fight the CIA. I'm fighting America's Central Intelligence Agency wherever it's operating. And you know what? Here's a list of 100 names of agents, and here's their photographs. You don't do that. You don't go and expose the identity of American agents and put them at risk of being killed immediately. Unbelievable. Immediately, agents began being attacked, and others would clearly be killed around the world. So the Secretary of State, which was Alexander Haig in 1981, he revoked Agee's passport. And then Agee, the former spy who's now exposing the CIA, excuse me, Agee sued the Secretary of State, claiming that they had violated his due process rights. But Agee lost. And here's what the Supreme Court says. Pardon me. A passport is, in a sense, a letter of introduction in which the issuing sovereign, that's the king or the president, vouches for the bearer and requests other sovereigns to aid the bearer. So a passport is like having a letter. Like in the old days, like, I don't know, in the play Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they go to Hamlet and he writes them. I'm sorry, I mixed up the play. Not that it makes any difference, but no, it is Hamlet. It is Hamlet. Hamlet writes a letter for Rosencrantz and a letter for Guildenstern, and he seals them with his father's seal, because his uncle, who's the king. And the letter asks the king, I believe, of France. It might not be. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I doubt any of you have been studying Hamlet this week, but maybe you have. Well, anyway, Hamlet writes a letter to an ally, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, he tells them the letter says one thing, but what it actually says is, please execute these two guys because I can't do it myself. And so they have their heads chopped off. Anyway, when you're going to travel back in those days, the king would write a letter giving you permission to travel to this other country and asking the king of the other country to please take care of you. Okay? And that's still today is what a passport is. Okay? Now, I never met the king and I never met the president. My wife met President Bush the Elder, but he was out of office by the time she met him. I think Clinton was the president at that time. But I've never met a president. Anyway, a passport is, I'm reading again the quote from the Supreme Court. A passport is, in a sense, a letter of introduction in which the issuing sovereign vouches for the bearer and requests other sovereigns to aid the bearer. So you're traveling with the king's backing, you know what I mean? The president's backing you. Now, is that how you think of a passport? It's not really the way I have ever thought about a passport. A letter of introduction from my nation to the other nation, and then the home nation, the U.S., for example, is putting its reputation on the line by recommending the bearer of the passport. And then the home nation also is asking the other nations, wherever I visit, to please take care of this man. Now, I know when I travel with a passport, I never thought of myself or my behavior as having a potential impact on the reputation of the United States. I didn't think of it as I represent the president in any way. I wanted to go over a few passports. I got some pictures here. The very first picture, there's no photograph. It's just kind of a drawing, and there's an eagle and a seal, and it says, "To all to whom these presents shall come, greeting." Description, and I'm not going to try to read the rest of it. But that was before they had photography, so they wouldn't put a photo on the passport in 1841. But the caption in the picture says, "This American travel document from 1841 describes its bearer as having a straight nose, fair complexion, and oval chin." So that's all the details they got. He has a straight nose, an oval complexion. A fair complexion and an oval chin. Not a lot of description. I guess it would be possible if you found a dead man and he had this passport, and you could say, well, it's not his passport. He must have been the one who stole it because, his chin's not oval or whatever. I don't know. It's funny how they try to describe the guy, but it's not super convincing. Okay, the next passport is about 100 years later, almost, or 80, and this is an Italian passport, and it has a photo, but I love how the guy's kind of casual. He's smoking a cigarette and reading the newspaper. This is an Italian passport, and the caption at the bottom says, in 1918 Italian passport photo shows its bearer smoking a cigarette and reading a newspaper. And I'm not sure. I can't tell from the stamps where he's been, other than Italy. Anyway, that's pretty interesting. The next picture is a little German girl or a young woman, and kind of reminds me of The Sound of Music. She's even got like the traditional clothes, and her hair's in a little bun. It almost looks like the kind of picture that the Secretary of State would put on their website back then if they had one. This 1921 German passport shows a young woman with her guitar, and the stamp is Bremen, which is a city in Germany. So that's a German passport, and you can tell they're using photos now, but it's kind of casual. They're not real concerned with getting exactly zoomed in on her face or anything. Just kind of gives you a feel of the person. Okay, then we have a passport with a whole family. I never knew that an entire family might have one passport. So it's mom and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. It says this temporary American passport was issued to a family traveling to occupied Germany to visit their father, who was in the Air Force. So they're going to Germany to visit Dad, who's in the Air Force, and I don't know. It makes you wonder if he was injured. Maybe, I don't know. It seems like most dads in the Air Force would be like, "Don't come visit me. It costs too much." But anyway, 1954. So they have a passport to get to Germany and back. Okay, now if you think a passport with a whole family in the photo is something, well, the next one has an entire traveling, I don't know, football team or whatever. It says this collective passport was issued to a Polish group in 1923 and featured a total of 30 men who appear to have been high school students. So that's pretty interesting. Poland issues a passport with 30 people on the same page. They are zoomed in. The photos are pretty good as far as zooming in on their facial features. But it's interesting how many of them are on the same passport altogether. Okay, and what do, and I'm hearing a quote from reading from my notes, what do today's standardized passport photos look like? If you had to pick up a passport photo of yourself or someone else, what does that really look like to you? What does it remind you of? Other than a driver's license photo, it does look a lot like a driver's license photo, but pardon me, driver's licenses and passports both look a whole lot like a third category, which is mug shots. And guess what? That's the exact complaint when they started doing pictures that way. There's a phrase, the rogues gallery. Like if you have a bunch of bums, you'd say, well, it's a rogues gallery. Or if you look at a baseball team and your team is going to win and you don't like the other team, the visiting team, and you call them a rogues gallery, it's just a bunch of criminals. But what a rogues gallery, the phrase rogues gallery, what that means is really it's like a whole bunch of mug shots. And so that's what this next picture is. These aren't passport photos, they're mug shots. But the funny thing is, it says in the caption that these were kind of passed around as kind of for entertainment. Standardized passport photos were thought to look like mug shots. And these come from a book called Professional Criminals of America, 1885. I guess this caption didn't mention it, but I read elsewhere that people would take mug shots to parties and just laugh at their horrible photo, and then they have these funny things under them, like it says, William Perry, pickpocket and sneak. Mark Shinborn, bank burglar. Henry Kuhn. Can't read that one. House. Nope. Just when I think I can read it, I can't. Oh, his says sneak. And then the next one, Joseph Colon, house burglar and sneak. I guess sneak was an official criminal terminology at the time. The next one says house sneak and burglar. And then the last guy says pickpocket. Anyway, yes, passport photos do look a whole lot like mug shots. But, there's a reason, same as the driver's license. They want to be able to really zoom in on your face and recognize you, If faces weren't the thing that was recognizable, they'd zoom in on your foot or your hand or something. But whatever's recognizable, that's what they're going to zoom in on. Kind of true with tattoos. Sometimes they'll take pictures of tattoos just to have evidence for the record. Okay, a final point about the passports. In the novel Les Miserables, or you may have seen the movie, I didn't love the movie, but it's probably because I really, really love the musical. And even more than the musical, I really like the novel. But I do like the musical, and so the movie version was a little bit weaker probably than the stage version. But anyway, in the story Les Miserables, which is set during the Napoleonic Wars in France, Jean Valjean is let out of prison after 19 years, where he went to prison for stealing a loaf of bread. But then he tried to escape a couple times, and so in the end he stayed there for 19 years. Now, as a convict, as an ex-con, Jean Valjean is given a yellow passport, and the simple fact that it's yellow, that much, just the color, identifies him as a convict. I mean, as soon as people see your passport, they know you've been to prison. And it's even more difficult because in France, at that time, you had to have a passport to go from one city to the next. It wasn't to leave France, just to get from one city to the next city, you had to pull out your passport. So everywhere you go, people know that you got a yellow passport, so you're a felon, you're an ex-con. And that's a hard thing to hide. It's kind of like escaping from jail, but you're still wearing an orange jumpsuit. Everybody knows you're just escaped from the jail, especially if you got the little white socks and the little plastic sandals. One time for Halloween, I dressed up as I happened to, long story, friend of mine, I don't know how he gets things, but he gave me a real county jail costume or uniform from Harris County. And it said Harris County Jail on the shirt and the pants, bright orange. I put on some white socks and some Jesus sandals, my daughter calls them, and took my very small children at the time to a fall festival at church where we were welcoming our brand new preacher. It was just the funniest place you could possibly go, wearing exactly like literal realistic clothes from Harris County Jail. But everybody there knew me, so it was funny, but it gave my wife, made her cringe, and the clothes disappeared after that. So I haven't been able to wear them, but I do have a photo I could show you if I remember. You'll have to tell me next time you see me in class. Anyway, if you wear an orange jumpsuit, everybody knows you're a con. If you have a yellow passport in France, they know you're an ex-convict. So it's a terrible problem. So passport regulations have changed over time, and maybe that's good. I don't think that an ex-convict gets a yellow passport, but as you know, sometimes you can't even bond out of jail because they think you're a flight risk. So, you know, if there's a criminal proceeding, your rights are not going to be the norm. I mean, you're not going to get to just go off to Tahiti when there's a case against you. Anyway, let me just review. The European Union lets you go anywhere in those 27 nations without a passport or a visa. Communist dictatorships, on the other extreme, they won't let you go anywhere because they figure you'll never come back. But most nations are in between. They let you travel, but it's going to require some paperwork. And again, the quote I showed you before from the Hague versus AG case, a passport is, in a sense, a letter of introduction in which the issuing sovereign vouches for the bearer and requests other sovereigns to aid the bearer. I also like the way they phrase it in Great Britain. They said, British law still regards the issuance of a passport as a matter of royal prerogative. In other words, we don't have to give you a passport, okay? It's up to them. A little bit more from the Supreme Court case of Hague versus AG. Let me read you a little bit more out of that case. A little bit more on passport law, okay? A passport is, in a sense, a letter of introduction in which the sovereign vouches for the bearer and requests other sovereigns to aid the bearer. That's the man holding the passport. With the enactment of travel control legislation making a passport generally a requirement for travel abroad, a passport took on certain added characteristics. This is a judge talking. Most important for present purposes, the only means by which an American can lawfully leave the country or return to it, absent a presidentially granted exception, is with a passport. As a travel control document, a passport is both proof of identity and proof of allegiance to the United States. Even under a travel control statute, however, a passport remains, in a sense, a document by which the government vouches for the bearer and for his conduct. Revocation of a passport undeniably curtails travel. But the freedom to travel abroad with a, quote, letter of introduction, unquote, in the form of a passport issued by the sovereign is subordinate to national security and foreign policy considerations. In other words, we don't care about your freedom to travel. That's not as important as the national security of the United States and our foreign policy considerations. In other words, if you're going to go over to some other country and cause a problem for America, then we're not going to let you go. And that's reasonable. And that's what it says here. As such, it is subject to reasonable government regulations. The court has made it plain that the freedom to travel outside the United States must be distinguished from the right to travel within the United States. So leaving the United States and going over and bothering another sovereign, that's a different thing. Like when I taught high school, you can be a jerk in my classroom all you want, but you ain't about to go next door and cause trouble for another teacher, because that reflects on me, and I don't need that. So there's not going to be a happening. And also, but for that matter, I'm not sending you to the office because that makes me look bad. I don't think any students ever knew that in high school, but you try not to send them, and some teachers don't, but I tried not to send people because it makes the teacher look like you can't handle your class. A little bit more on passports. A few passport facts. In 2020, according to passportindex.org, the passport of the United Arab Emirates is the most powerful passport in the world. The Emirati passport allows visa-free travel to 179 countries. That's the result of negotiations, as now the UAE citizens enjoy a visa waiver to the 26 Schengen countries of Europe. They're talking about the European Union. The second ranking passports of Germany, Finland, Luxembourg, and Spain, they allow travel to 172 countries without a visa, I guess. And then the passport of the USA and the United Kingdom, they're not ranked at the top, but they are also among the most powerful, ranking number 171 and 169, respectively. Or that is, they allow you into 171 and 169 nations. Here's another interesting fact and a good picture. The only person in the world who does not need to carry a passport when traveling abroad is Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. The UK passport is issued by Her Majesty, the Queen. Therefore, the Queen does not need to carry a passport, as otherwise she would be issuing a passport to herself. And I guess it would seem sort of silly that she would write her own passport and say, please protect this person when she travels. All other members of the royal family, however, do have passports. I suspect there are other sovereigns in the world who don't need passports, but, you know, the Queen of England's maybe the best known or most popular royal, but I'm sure there are some others that don't have passports. I got the next page is a photo from the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and I think this is really helpful under photo basics. In fact, I put this exact screenshot on Facebook yesterday, and I had the same little box here with the arrow pointing to number 3, which says, have someone else take your photo. No selfies. So I personally have said to you, I don't like selfies, not even selfie videos, but, you know, we do what we have to do. But anyway, little tip for your future. If you're ever making your own passport photo, you can't use a selfie for, I hope, obvious reasons. They make you look weird. And because I hate selfies, that's a perfect place to end this selfie video.